Hi, Costa. Good morning.
Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Yeah, fine. How are you? Yeah,
Not too bad.
I like
How
your
many
back.
how many do you anticipate for this call?
I think I have, let me just see. Let me go into I think I have two candidates. David's on. Who is Docs Fouls 21?
That's me, David Falzarano. I was invited and being introduced for the first time to Costa and the team here. So nice to meet you as well, Michael.
Michael, he's an associate of Michael Abdi's.
Oh, great. Okay, thank you.
You got it.
David, good to meet you. Both Davids.
Very nice to meet you as well.
So we'll give other participants another couple minutes. I'll text Chris to see if he's got anyone else
Okay.
joining us today.
I think he has one, and I'm waiting for one other.
Okay, we'll do a couple more minutes, then we'll jump into it.
By the way, I've done some research on all the social medias that you guys put out. Your content is fantastic, and I've seen both of your faces throughout it. Obviously, providing these kinds of meetings recorded and putting it out there as raw and genuine as it is sells very well, in my opinion. And so it's no question about it why people are buying what you guys are doing. So that part of it alone, just being able to click around and get to see your faces and then see those same people on the meeting, that really makes a connection that I think a lot of people miss in this world of being able to almost make everybody in a sense a celebrity, right?
Yeah.
Getting to see so much content of a videoed version of somebody and then getting to speak to that person live, no matter their actual level in life, business or otherwise. And I've seen it now a couple of times in my own experience where, I also have a couple other businesses that I've partnered up with and invested with, and people matter, right? And making those connections through, whether it's now TikTok videos or anything, you almost become famous, right? You almost become like a local celebrity when you see that person that makes that much content and has that many followers, without really living in that generation as much as, a lot of people may assume as you get, younger and younger down the spectrum, you just assume that everybody that is under the age of 40 must know everything about TikTok and know how to do all this stuff. And I don't, right? that content stuff is not where I'm at, right? Put me in the back room of strategy, business strategy, operations all day, love it. But put me in front of the camera, I'm a geek, right? Like I get all, but
Yep.
you guys are really good at it.
No, those are great points. Started to dabble a little bit in TikTok as well, actually, because those kids will be driving soon, so you got to be ahead of it. But right? To your point, David, we had our franchisee who is in Peachtree City, Georgia, which is a suburb of Atlanta.
Yep.
I called him the other day just to check in on him, and he commented to me. He was like, at Discovery Day, they told me that I'd get your cell phone number, and I didn't really think anything of it. I didn't think, you would actually ever call me. And I was like,
It's funny because I built the system. I'll give you a quick background until somebody else joins that you guys got to put the show on here. But so I'll give you a quick background on who I am and where I come from. But Michael introduced me to the concept and, brought me in a couple of weeks ago as he knew I was in transition from my former career, which was helping my family start a childcare franchise. And so literally my mom 25 years ago said, "Hey, I'm working in childcare as an assistant. I see what they're doing. We could do it better. You want to open up a little thing?" And my father.
That's how it always starts.
Always, right? It literally was, let's
I
see
could do it better.
The basement, right? Let's see if we can fix up the basement. And we literally fixed up the basement and started running childcare out of there until we realized, you're only allowed to watch 5 children in your basement in New Jersey. There's laws against you putting, more than that. And so we started looking in the world of, who are the competitors? Who's doing it out there? And I will tell you that those national competitors that we identified 25 years ago are pretty much the same 5 or 6 that are still sitting above us in the world ranking of, national childcare systems. But we were different. They all were already launched before I was even born in a system of machinery that created hundreds of these locations. And my parents literally started it out of our local community solution for a mom and pop shop And we opened up a second a year later, and a third, and a fourth. When we got to 2014, me and my father and a group of no bigger than 6 other individuals that we called our management team were running 14 locations as corporate locations. We were partnered with all these individuals, but the conglomerate was basically the family and our group of people that put together these investors to come together to run these 14 locations. And the decision was made at that point, we can keep growing 1 or 2 or 3 with all these, strings with all these people and partners. And we had a good business, right? It was a really lucrative business. Or we can franchise it. And there's enough systems in the world to say, we're not doing anything much different than what they're already doing. We're just going to take our version of it and put our spin and our story and our family behind it. And like you said, Costa, people used to say to me, oh, I saw you and your father said this at the Discovery Day, but you're actually going to call me? Like, you're actually going to be the person that does all this? And that's what we figured out. We took it from those family locations, 15 locations, or at the time we had 14. We sold 2 of them back as franchisees. We turned our locations into the largest franchisee of the system, and we started selling independent franchises. Right now, I got severed about 6 months ago. We brought in a PE firm after 10 years of doing that. We brought in a PE firm about 18 months ago, and they took a different direction in terms of the way me and my father were growing the business. And I will tell you, we took a lot of pride in choosing location and franchisees. And so we understood limitations and restrictions on those 2 things were going to slow down the result. But it was also going to ensure that when we put our name on the wall, our pride, our joy of our brand, that it was never going to fail. And we never had a failure in 25 years of franchise. Well, in only 11 or 12 years of franchising it actually, but in 25 years of running childcare businesses, we've never had a failure. We've had some transitions of sales. We've had some closures that were more lucrative to do this than that. And we figured it out over the years as you got to renew things and you got to, re-sign things. But what I was doing was 10 times larger than the scope of what you guys produce at the end of a building, a property, a real estate play. And my focus was take a franchisee, kind of like Brandon, because I got a chance to talk to Brandon last week. Take a franchisee from the time they sign and take them all the way through to open, and then beyond, as long as you have operations people and operations managers, you can hand them off. And that transition and process was unique to us. I created it. It was mine, right? This is how I was doing it. And as long as, the people at the top were okay with our growth at that time, we were good with it. It wasn't until the PE firm came in that they said, all right, it's time to really bring in heavy hitters, friends from Harvard or Yale or wherever they came from. And they took the family out, and that was their objective. And right, wrong, or indifferent, we were more than handsomely rewarded, but our baby was taken from us, right? It kind of, I could say the analogy to my father. I said, I got to imagine, it kind of feels like I'm married off like my firstborn or something. And that's what we did. But they're still growing. They're 65 open and over 150 agreements sold. And so they've got a long pipeline still to fill. But their process is a much longer one, right? It's a much larger structure and solution. And it's a 3 to 4
More bureaucracy.
Yeah, with bureaucracy. I can't tell you how many things childcare has to jump through, even more so than literally putting oil in the ground. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the process because our kids, I have a 1.5-year-old and my son just turned 4, and they're in daycare with a school called the Young School, and they were bought by private equity. And the Young School, I don't even remember the name of it, but they subscribe to this type of teaching called like the Reggio style of teaching.
Yep.
And
Reggiano. Yep.
Yeah. And we loved it. Absolutely loved it. And we chose it over the Goddard School, which is awesome. A much more kind of, I walked in and it was like white everywhere. And they were like, we're going to teach 3-year-olds Mandarin. And I'm like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And so we chose the Young School, and it was amazing for my firstborn, especially going through COVID. But then the last year, it's with private equity, like these little changes, just it's still a good school. Don't get me wrong. Both of our kids are still there, but it's just not the same as when the family owned it. Yeah. But anyway, no one else has joined the call, and I want to be respectful of David's time. And so I'm going to kick things off. I usually do the villain origin story, how we got to where we are right now, and then we'll do Q&A. We can have as many questions as either of the Davids want, because it's just us today. So, and Michael usually curates the questions. If anyone else joins, we'll go ahead and let them in. Michael, you look like you're about to say something.
Well, yeah, I just I wanted to mention Mike at BuzzTees was supposed to be joining us, but he can't today, so it'll be next week. And David, just wanted to give him a quick introduction. He's from Bugetstown, near, you probably know where that is, Costa, just west of Pittsburgh. And he's got a full-time job at looking at this opportunity to diversify some assets. So we've done about, I think, close to 2 or 3 calls. Thanks for joining us, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, we have a good footprint in the Pittsburgh area. So what's the name of the town?
It's Burgettstown. I'm about 30 minutes west of Pittsburgh.
Okay, so let me take a look here. So we have our 2 Youngstown stores that are really close to the border of Pennsylvania, but is Burgettstown more West Virginia side or Ohio side?
It's more the West Virginia side, close to Weirton.
Oh man, you're pretty close to East Palestine. Kind of.
Yeah, I'm about 35 miles almost due south.
Hmm.
So I think I'm okay in terms of the contamination.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
I haven't grown any extra fingers or toes yet, so.
Well, our Boardman and Poland store are directly north of East Palestine. And it's funny, as we do business in these different towns, you learn like the different pronunciations of them. And for whatever reason, when towns are made in America, often the pronunciations are just like butchered. So like our store in North for Sales is one of our best stores, and that's a Pittsburgh suburb. I'm not sure if you're familiar with North for Sales, right next to McKeesport.
Yeah.
And like when I first opened there, I was calling it North Versailles, and people are like, "What?" They're like getting like upset. And then we just opened a store in Milan, Illinois, and Milan, Illinois is a fun story because it's not Milan, and they get really upset if you call it Milan. But they back in when the town was being formed, a piano company said they were going to open a piano shop in this town that they were creating, and they gave this company all these subsidies, and then the business never opened up. So to spite them, they said the pronunciation of the town was going to be Milan instead of Milan, and that's a town where it's right next to Moline, which is where John Deere is headquartered. But anyway, if you guys, just FYI, I've got double screens and my camera's mounted in a weird place. So if it seems as though I'm staring off into the distance, I'm actually looking at my screen. So just a little bit about me. I was born in Portland, Maine, spent most of my life in Portland, Maine, ended up in Maryland for college and met my wife there, which is typically how you get grounded somewhere. I started off in finance, going through retail to brokerage to asset management. And then I was working at T. Rowe Price in Baltimore when I really was trying to figure out, okay, I'm very entrepreneurial. I've always been entrepreneurial, middle school, selling video games to friends, flipping things, figuring out the vig between taking a game from Blockbuster and what the fee is for losing it versus selling it, and that kind of stuff. And so I've always been entrepreneurial, always wanted my own business. And so I really did enjoy my job at T. Rowe Price. So I wasn't anticipating leaving. I had a Series 7, 6, 66, and 63. And so I was like, what are some businesses that are manager centric, but not skilled manager centric? I really didn't want to be pigeonholed by a skilled employee that if they wanted to hold the business hostage, they could. And so I was looking at different models. You have some businesses where, in a pizzeria, if the pizza maker decides to take a day off, if no one else knows how to, toss dough, then you're pretty much out of luck. So the quick lube business was interesting to me because I always viewed it as a quasi utility. Everybody needs to get oil changes. And so it's something that is reoccurring, it's predictable, and there's not a real high level of skill necessary. I can teach anyone to do an oil change. In fact, for the longest time, the largest segment of the market was do-it-yourself oil changers, and that has since shifted because of generational differences. You know, as you guys look at your parents and the kind of things that they used to do around the house versus right now, especially these days, you know, any service that reduces friction between the end consumer and the service is having success right now. And so while your parents may have been more inclined to change their own oil, you know, the generation below us is not wanting to do that whatsoever. So our industry is actually in a state of growth right now. And what I mean by that is the do it for me market is actually outpacing the sale of electric vehicles. So the amount of people who want their oil change done for them is outpacing the sale of electric vehicles, which means our for the time being, our industry is in a state of growth. And a lot of people think that it's a declining market. And so I was at my desk at T. Rowe Price, and I was looking at this quick lube in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I was kind of just going through Yelp reviews of the larger the players on top, and just trying to reverse engineer, you know, what it was that the consumer was looking for. And some of the players on top kind of took for granted their place in the system and took for granted their customers, and it created an opportunity. And so our North Star is the oil change only model. And some of our larger competitors have gotten away from that model. And so for me, after I took over that Harrisburg store, I got to implement my view, much like David said, I thought I could do it better. And so I got to implement my view of the industry and figure out, you know, does this model work? And I was able to really do well with that Harrisburg store. We opened up a second store in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, which is a town of 5,000, 6,000 people, and replicated the model again, and it worked. So then we opened a third store, fourth store, basically reaffirming that the oil change only model is what people want. And so I saw an opportunity with the direction that Jiffy Lube was going, basically doubling and tripling down on the multi-care model. And just the feedback I was getting from my own customers, especially the ones that we were taking from Jiffy Lube, you know, all the things they like about us were all the things that they didn't like about our competitors. The high pressure upselling, the you know, the slow wait times due to all these other services now being offered. And then internally, our employees, especially ones that had worked at some of the competitors, they enjoyed working for us better because they weren't expected to do unethical things. There wasn't pressure on them to sell things in order to keep their jobs. And so this all culminated in a model that we felt was scalable, and hence why we started franchising. The model itself has resonated, and that's why we've been successful at selling these units, is because everybody has their own oil change story. Michael has been a brand ambassador of ours since day one, and he has gotten several oil change stories, which has only made his job a little bit easier. It's almost like the pain he gets from going through these oil change experiences helps him sell these franchises, because everyone can relate. So when we were looking at, especially post-COVID, but pre-supply chain crisis, pre-lumber crisis, we really wanted to hone in on, okay, how do we make this an oil change only experience? And what we thought, it all started with the building itself. You know, we are in special use buildings. There's only so many of them. It's a very difficult business to fail in. And so the inventory of quick lube facilities is not a large inventory. So we thought to ourselves, how do we build one of these brand new for not a lot of money? And so we stripped everything down to the bare bones. We were able to get a building basically put up for about $300,000. And that was pre-supply chain issues, pre-lumber crisis, it seems like every other week there's a different crisis we're going through. But What I will say is if you go on Crexy, if you go on LoopNet and you look at these oil change facilities, they are being built for $1.5, $2 million. The fact that we're able to build our building and have the same unit economics as any of these other places is a real testament to our team. And so when there is a 30% increase in cost because of inflation or because of lumber or because of steel, 30% of a $300,000 building is a lot less than 30% of $1 million building. And at the end of the day, what that allows us to do is stay true to our core belief that the consumer wants an oil change only experience. And then if we scale, if we execute on this thing, if we do the things that we need to do in order to get these locations up at scale, then we'll be able to have that top of mind brand awareness when it comes to the oil change experience. A lot of people liken us to Chick-fil-A, which I really appreciate because they have done probably the best job of anyone of penetrating an established market in terms of the top of mind brand awareness. We do an exercise at every single discovery day where we ask everybody in the room, when I say fast food, what do you say? And so both Davids, when I say fast food, what do you say?
McDonald's.
Yeah.
I would say McDonald's as well. Yeah.
And I appreciate those answers. And that's exactly, especially 2 years ago, it was McDonald's across the board. And I use this as an example of how it's possible to change consumer sentiment, because in the very early month, and we still get a ton of McDonald's, don't get me wrong, it's the largest fast food chain for a reason, but these last few discovery days, and Michael can attest to this, we've had as much as 50-50 McDonald's, Chick-fil-A. We've had some discovery days where Chick-fil-A has been said more than McDonald's.
Now, if you ask me where would you rather eat as a system in fast food, I would say probably Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, right.
Maybe even Chipotle at this point.
But as far as this mental exercise goes, you know, I think if we were to do this same exercise with the oil change industry, right now, nobody's really, I give Jiffy Lube all the credit in the world, and they paved the way for this industry to even exist. But to this day, I think, you know, if you asked 100 people off the street, they're probably taking in 80% of the votes. People will probably say, okay, if you say fast oil change, what do you think? Or quick lube, what do you think? Oil change shop, what do you think? It's probably going to be Jiffy Lube. But what the Chick-fil-A example means to me is that it's possible, that nobody is safe. If McDonald's is not safe with a 60-year head start, that means nobody is. And that means that if we execute on what we do and we get really good at the fast oil change market and we stay in our lane, that we could penetrate the top of mind brand awareness as well and be known as the fast oil change only store. We actually went as far as to trademark the phrase the oil change only store. We also, just on a side note, because I have announced this publicly now, we have trademarked the phrase America's favorite oil change. And the irony of that is that was Jiffy Lube's phrase for such a long time, and they, whether purposefully or neglectfully, let that trademark expire. And I caught them sleeping I caught them asleep at the wheel, and we trademarked the phrase, and now we own the phrase America's favorite oil change. So and my hope is to make that phrase be true to us, because I think we're very much well known in the Pennsylvania market, especially Central PA, Western PA, and I think a lot of people like referring to us as Pennsylvania's favorite oil change because that's something we have said from day one. But obviously, our goals are much larger than that, and we hope to shift that top of mind brand awareness. So, with that, I will hand it off to Michael to kind of curate questions. Just so both Davids know, we do a discovery day every single month. If you want to ask pointed questions, that's fine. We do get into the secret sauce at Discovery Day. So we try to have this call be more about macro conversations and not really nuts and bolts, but I'm more than happy to answer questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Costa. Davids, thanks for joining us this morning. Usually, I think what works best is we give each candidate an opportunity to ask one question. We do round robin. That way, we sort of get a fair representation, especially when we have large groups of individuals on the call. And yes, regarding the Discovery Day, it's held in Hanover. And the one for March is actually coming up on the 16th. David, I'm assuming, well, Noah, that if you attend, you'll probably drive.
I
versus
would drive.
Yeah. And so we do have a dinner if you're going to come in the night before, on the 15th, and then Discovery Day starts around 8:45. We try and wait until 9 because sometimes we have West Coast individuals, and then we run through to about 1:45, and basically it covers everything. It's a deep dive. Costa has his team present. We go through training, marketing. We have our leasing company on. We have our real estate company joining us, plus all of our suppliers. I think the supply chain, for me, now that I know Costa, for 2 years, is just perfecto. And I think David, we've talked a little bit about that. So they will also be on via Zoom. Anyway, David, why don't you start? David, well, know if you have a question for Costa.
Sure. And, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, Costa. I think that'll, be very helpful in my decision and looking into this brand and into this model. I think, one of the burning questions that I have is, I've noticed that your franchise expansion has been pretty significant and pretty quick in the last couple of years. And with that type of growth, what systems and things do you have in place and support to allow, current franchisees and future franchisees be able to have the sort of support they need to be successful? What sort of things do you have in place to, in other words, not outkick your coverage?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a perfect question to kick this off with, because I've always been process driven, and I've had to rely on third-party resources from day one. So as an organization, we have been very adept at putting procedures in place and third-party resources in place to substitute human capital whenever necessary. So just to take a step back, our third location was in Mount Prospect, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. Our fourth location was that North Versailles store. And so from a very early day in our company's history, embedded in the DNA of our business is the ability to run the business from afar using processes, using third-party resources, using software. We're very innovative. We're very flexible because of our size. And so what that has allowed us to do is to ensure that as the franchisee moves along this process, when they enter into the process and start with our field associates and then move from field associates to operations and then operations to actually running their own store, we have those processes in place to make sure that at a bare minimum, our franchisees are being touched on a very regular basis by someone in the office. We've put together a website called oilu.org, free to check it out. It's not behind a password or a paywall, so you can always check that out. It has our training on it. It has, just to the other David's point with our content, I utilize cross-purposing content as much as possible to help in lieu of a human being able to talk to you about something. We have a video library for basically every incident that you can think of. And on top of that, David, because we've reduced this to the least amount of moving parts possible, the least amount of SKUs, the least amount of staff, it's very manageable in terms of support. That being said, we want to continue this growth. And so it's one of the reasons that other David is on this call today, is for that very reason, is because he has scaled a business before. And so David's not on the call as a prospective franchisee. He's on the call as a prospective investor and prospective advisor to help get us to the next level, because he has done that. So one thing I do know about myself is what I don't know and what my weaknesses are. And so I am very good off the hip. I'm an operator at heart. I enjoy going in and doing oil changes with my guys, but when I need to put someone in place, I'll do that. And so we are at a phase right now where we're crossing that threshold where our current team needs to be beefed up a little bit to be able to handle the exact question that you just asked.
Okay, thank you.
I would chime in there and say every franchise system, and David, I'll just introduce myself briefly. I don't know how long you were on the call earlier when I was speaking to Costa and Michael, but Costa mentioned I'm being introduced to the system similar to you are today, with the intent that, being able to come to a discovery day might be an even further useful kind of introspective way of saying, how can this work for me? How could I see this working for me? And so I would agree with a lot of what Costa said in the industry, in the sense that service and people is what you're always going to need and rely on as an entrepreneur or a franchisee, however you want to slice the situation in terms of how you identify it. But your objective is to make money running this business. If he said, hey, we do oil changes and we also do, songs and dances, well, then you're going to get a hat, right? I mean, that's ultimately the process in which you want to follow something that gets you the most maximum amount of money return for the least amount of effort. Now, that's required. It's always expected. And I think that there's some level of operations needed to be a successful franchisee, but not every successful franchisee is good at operations. And that's where I think that there's a level of support that comes on the operational side when you have the ability, and Costa said it earlier, to call him directly from now until the end of time. That's powerful. You're not going to get that from a Jiffy Lube or a more seasoned franchisor that's going to start to count their time and money as every time we spend a minute on a call, we're not making this or we're not doing that. And there's a level of service that has to be there at the very early stages that connects people. So I thought it was an interesting point you made, is to jump right to what support, what systems, what processes. That's ultimately the secret sauce. You can't give it all away in the sense of this is what we've done, how we've done it in operating, but what you need to ultimately buy, and this is what I've said to people throughout, there's a huge convention going right now in Vegas, the IFA. And, a lot of people go to this convention looking for franchises and to understand how you do things in franchising better or for worse. And they figure it all out as they go. They're always evolving, right? And you're always looking to find one that's going to kind of link up more so in the people, the core values of how they do things, why they do things, and then hopefully play a role in making the systems even more efficient as a franchisee of that system at an earlier stage. So I chimed in there. I hope it was helpful to you. I'm also happy to take questions from you if you have anything that you think might flow that way. But
yeah, and David too, that's other David made a good point. Having your pulse on the macro behaviors of consumers is super important. And so I think that one thing that we have always been good at from day one is figuring out what way is the consumer shifting. So we saw during COVID the mass surgence of delivery services, Uber Eats, DoorDash. We went from driving up to a menu board and saying, give me a number 2. Who thought that ordering food could have been even faster than that? You used to have to walk up and say the meal name, and then you drive up and say the meal name, and then you drive up and say a number, and then now you mobile order, you show up, they throw the food through your window and you drive away. And so it's always evolving. And so it just coincidentally happens to be our industry needs to regress back to its origins. We were ahead of its time. If you look at all the big startups that are happening today, it's all about selling people back their time. And when I started really honing in on the fact that the oil change experience needs to be as least painful as possible, and we started storytelling and brand building around selling people back their time, that's when things started to take off for us. And that was just from watching the consumer behavior, seeing what matters to them, and that's just having the flexibility and the innovation to stay on top of these things through, whether it's social media or whatnot. I know that tailed off of your actual question, but I think it ties in pretty nicely. So,
David, W, do you have another question for Costa?
I don't think I have any other specific questions at this point. I mean, Michael, I'm still somewhat early in this process. And, you know, I'm thinking that somewhere down the line, there'll be more details, you know, once I get through the FDD and so forth. So I'll have more detailed questions at that point, and maybe that's the time left for Discovery Day as well.
Great. Well, and we'll on the next call we'll do a review of any questions you have on the FTD, and then we'll get into territory as well. So anyway, well, thank you for joining us, and other David, thank you too. I'm looking forward to talking with you further. Costa can give you my contact info if you need it, if you have questions for me.
Appreciate that. Yeah, I've already linked in and connected up with you, I believe. So we'll definitely connect.
All right.
Have a
Good.
good one.
Costa, thank you.
All right. Talk to you later, Michael. Good to meet you, David W.
All right. Nice to meet you too, Costa. Thanks for your time.
No problem. David, do you want to hop on a phone call or you just want to stay on?
Whatever's more comfortable for you.
Yeah, just stay on and
Cool.
keep it rolling.
So awesome. No, that was really good to be able to get to kind of see the interface. Tell me, is Michael a friend Devco employee?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Michael has been our basically main brand rep from day one.
Cool. Cool. All right. So tell me that experience and kind of your history in the sense of you guys open and ran your own shops. At what point did Friend Devco get involved? How did that all start? And
so, and how much time do you got?
I've got some time. I don't want to take
Okay.
up all of your time, but I've got at least till noon.
So I had never anticipated franchising, and actually one of my most viral videos was one I did locally here in Hanover, where I said, where the title of the YouTube video was, "We are not a franchise." Our branding has always been so on point that people thought we were larger than what we were. And in some towns that can actually play backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you want to be local. You don't want to be, some out of
big
town
corporate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so my whole business has been built on asking why, like going into an industry as an outsider and just like not giving a shit about what other people's opinions are is a superpower.
Yeah.
And so like, I still have an email. So like right over my shoulder, right there is an oil filter, a private label oil filter. And I had talked to an oil filter manufacturer and they were like, "Oh, you can't do private label oil filters unless you do $1 million a year." And this was back when I had like 2 locations. Cause I was like, okay, this is a geographic restricted business. 85% of your customers come from within a 3-mile radius. You could literally give away free oil changes, but there's a delta where someone from like New York is not going to come to Harrisburg because they're going to actually spend more money on gas than a free oil change. So how do I create a business that has the ability to scale without actually needing to open up 1 million locations? And then that's where the private label products came in. Then,
So how many private label products do you guys have right now?
so just going left to right, the oil filters are made through a company we sourced in China. They're very high quality filters. I've done videos cutting them open and showing them against some of the larger competitors. Very popular. The additives, so this power steering fluid is part of a 6 SKU additive line that we have that includes oil system cleaner, high mileage additive, brake fluid. That's through a manufacturer in Florida. And then our private label motor oil, which is the big bottle. Right now I have to source a new manufacturer because it was being made in Ukraine in the Sumy region, which is on the border of Russia. So they have that plant has been down indefinitely for over a year. And so we have to source a new private label manufacturer of our motor oil. So that being said, I had always opened up locations by, I had gone into some locations that people had always thought were either like ghost locations, I think are what they're referred to, where like 3 other people have gone in and failed and no one has ever seemed to succeed. I've always been able to go into some of these spaces and turn it around incredibly quickly and have successful stores. It was around location, I don't know, 6 or 7 where I saw kind of what was happening, because I had visited a location in Bloomingdale, Illinois, where the previous tenant was paying almost 15 grand a month in rent. Ooh. And he was doing nearly What's that?
That's a lot of money for a small space, isn't it?
It's a ton. But here's the thing. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, when the oil change interval was every 2,000 miles and not every 5,000 miles, these Jiffy Lubes, these grease monkeys, they were printing money. And so they would sign these 10 and 15-year leases with escalations, and they would just rubber stamp the lease.
Yep.
And so I was looking at the timeline, and I'm like, oh, we're approaching, second renewal for a lot of these Jiffy Lube franchisees. They're just going to shut it down. They're not going to pay $20,000 a month rent, when they're doing not as much business as what they used to do.
Yep.
And so my miscalculation was, so I thought, private equity had basically penetrated the quick lube market. Most of Valvoline's franchisees are private equity. Most of Jiffy Lube's big franchisees are private equity. I was like, oh, these guys are going to shed off these buildings and they're going to become available. And I'll be able to build a oil change empire by just signing leases. And I won't have to franchise. But what I miscalculated, because this is actually what happened, but what I miscalculated was the landlord's tolerance for just sitting on the property. So, for example, there was a location in Des Plaines, Illinois that I wanted incredibly badly, but the guy had been receiving 10 grand a month for the last 20 years.
Yeah, now you want to offer him a lot less.
And I go in and I tell him, hey, 15 grand a month, that's what the market rate for these buildings are. And he's like, take a hike. And the building has been empty for 5 years. And I reach back out to him every once in a while.
Yeah.
And so to use the Bloomingdale example, I now rent that store for $1,700 a month. And the previous tenant was paying nearly $15,000 by the end of his lease.
Yeah.
But the landlord needed to taste some pain for a while because the property taxes are not nothing in some states. And so the building had to, but it just wasn't fast enough for me.
Yep.
And also it takes a ton of capital to do it corporately. So
that's what franchising is all about.
Exactly.
Bringing other people's capital to the game so that you can get your brand out there even quicker, better, faster. So now that we don't have a prospective franchisee in the call, what kind of proprietary, if any, systems have you created in terms of running, like operating? Are you doing anything? Both. Let's start at the consumer level. And I apologize because I haven't had the ability to travel far enough because you're not close enough to me in Central Jersey, but if you were to go into a Costa Oil, is anything happening in there that is completely proprietary to you? Like you mentioned before, we don't upsell, and employees love that. And we don't, and customers love that. We actually get them in and out of there in 10 minutes. The price is obviously the last thing, and you can figure out how to discount and come up with all the other ways in which you can throw things at that wall. But is there really anything different that you're providing versus the Jiffy Lube, in that experience?
Yeah, so that's a great question because people ask us all the time, what's your moat? And, there's a lot of things I can answer internally, like having less turnover of employees, the building itself, but that's not consumer facing like what you're asking, because at the end of the day, the core business, anyone can do it, but no one has figured out how to do it without sacrificing everything else. So all of our competitors are doing all these other services that add on to bay time. So what I identified was our main KPIs and our main vision. And so car count, bay time, right? And so we don't want to do anything that sacrifices those two things. I'm going to step out of my office for a second and grab something real quick, because when people do ask me what my moat is, this is typically what I reference.
Cool.
So I've broken down our business to, and let me maybe turn off my virtual my virtual background for a second.
Invisible. Is that your pops?
What's that? No, that's an employee. All right. So, let's go back. when people ask me what my mode is, I typically reference my flow chart, which is these two charts right here. I have broken down our business to the most simplest acts. And what this flow chart allows for us to do is the same amount of efficiency as what Jiffy Lube or Valvoline need 5 to 7 guys to do.
Yep.
So with this flow chart, we can do as many cars with 2 employees as what everyone else in our space needs 5 to 7 in order to do. And so that has freed up our labor model to just reduce that amount.
So do you need 2 people on staff at all operating hours always?
We have allowed on a case-by-case basis, sometimes 1 employee to run the shop in order
It's
to stay
possible.
open.
But like conceivably, can one person do this by themselves?
Yes, but not as fast, and you miss some of the quality assurance that comes with having 2 people, because that flow chart also coincides with our ecosystem, which is our call out system, which is how that we have no mistakes. And so you can't do the ecosystem if there's only 1 person. It's impossible to quality
That's
check
the answer
certain.
to the question, Costa. When I ask proprietary systems, your call out system is a proprietary system that you're doing that no one else is doing, right? Is that
There are
unique to
some,
you?
yeah. So most places have their version of a call out system.
Okay.
We call ours the ecosystem because we just have top side and bottom side repeat what they're doing. But I think most Jiffy Lubes have some kind of call out system.
No, I love it. All about branding. And so let me just give you a little bit of my history and how I can conceivably fit in as per Michael Abdi's conversations and thoughts. And I'll give you, again, I might repeat myself a little bit here, but family started a business in the childcare industry. I knew nothing about. My father at that point knew very little about, if anything. And like you said, it didn't require a huge amount of skill in the specific industry for us to provide the customer what we thought they wanted. And we were local enough to the people in our town, and we opened up right around the corner from our home where my parents, ran the Little League stuff, right? And did all that stuff that we did growing up. And so when we opened up, we really were a home away from home, right? We really were the things we put on the cliche wall, vision, mental, things of we do things right because it's the right thing to do and like live by those core values. And I can tell you, my father's discovery day was him going through core values. And I would espouse to you that you have a history and a story that you can easily tell over and over again. But at the point in which you're doing this 2 times a week, 3 times a month, right? However many times you need to do to keep up with the demand that comes with running the whole system, you're going to want to spend your time differently. And what I would tell you is you can even get more efficient. And what if we were to create that same exact flow chart for your franchisee at every phase and hand them the tools to the show that when you're in real estate, here's what it looks like in this flow chart. When you get through real estate, negotiating a lease, here's what that looks like. Then this, then this. And you have all the stages broken down in as simple of a flow as you can get them. And I wish I had my wall of my old office behind me, because I literally had the development flow chart right on my wall behind me. And as soon as you lifted up your stack, I said, this is going to work. He gets it. And as simple as you can get it for everybody in your system, I'll give you a little bit of color to who I was dealing with. So we started a family business. We're Italian descent, but I'm 4th generation American. My grandparents are still 95, 96 years old, and they're not speaking Italian, right? They're American. And so we grew up in New Jersey my whole life, and it really was a small town, small grown thing. But as we evolved and as we started our business, it was happening. Our town got completely inundated. And right now, this area of central New Jersey is the largest Asian Indian population outside of New Delhi. Like literally, East Coast, New Jersey, and central New Jersey is one of the largest mass migrations over the last 20 years of Asian Indians. It's been ridiculous. My entire town sold every house sold, and every family that bought was an Indian family with young kids. And so our entire business changed immediately as we recognized what the hell was going on in our town, where we started our small little childcare family business and served primarily, people like us for the first few years. And then all of a sudden it started to flip around into a whole nother business model. And what we quickly realized is they all want the same level of support that we wanted for our own children, right? And the same for you. The customer wants time is money, and they want you to take care of their car better than they can, even so, right? And I couldn't even change my own oil at this point, and I'm ashamed to admit that to you, but my car, I couldn't even tell you where the oil is. You lift up the friggin' hood and it's like a computer. I don't know what. Washer fluid, battery. I got those two things. After that, I'm like, I'm lost here, right? And so I'm not a huge car enthusiast or somebody that comes at it with the car industry background. But what I can tell you is I took a family's operations homegrown thing, and with a small amount of resources, turned that into a franchise system, which is, I think, the 7th largest national childcare in the country right now. So we figured out systems and solutions and how to simplify it for, I will tell you, a lot of Asian Indian people that have a lot of opinions and ways of which they do things. Expectations of money, but also work effort and ethic is different across the board for every one of them, right? And so I got to the point where I said, if I can convince or teach this Indian woman that has never held a job in her life because her husband wants to buy this business for her, she likes kids, and I can teach her how to get financing, and I can teach her how to launch this business, and I can teach her how to be successful in running other educational type facilities, I think that proves that we can pretty much dumb it down to the lowest level. And if that's the case, then I have to now only worry about when I get someone really, really smart on the other side of this. And then I would get, CFOs of companies saying, hey, I want to buy this company up and I want to, launch 2, 3, 4, 5 of these. And I'd have to actually scale up to their level of expertise in certain ways. And so we had a wide spectrum of who we were managing as franchisees. And it actually was a great thing because, as we got further and further west, we started to introduce ourselves to new markets, and we were no longer the mom and pop, right? And we started to learn that if I showed up and tried to give testimony for what my family's done my whole life in Tennessee, they're not going to get approved. They don't want to hear some city slicker from New Jersey talk really fast at them. They want to hear the kid from Tennessee saying, my family's starting a childcare, and right. And so we learned really quickly that we were evolving outside of our reach, and we started to do sales because we are very blessed to have said we closed down sales in New Jersey after we had about 50 franchisees in just New Jersey alone, because you can only fit so many childcare centers in the markets. And so we're the largest right now provider and service provider of childcare in New Jersey. And I believe we will be in Pennsylvania shortly if we're not yet. But we started to grow outside of just those states. And I've looked at your maps. You guys seem to be pretty scattered, but you're also much more multi-united. So you probably only have like 40 or 50 different actual individuals, individual operators or franchisees, but they're managing many more locations or potential locations. So there's some risk with that, but there's also a lot of value in that. If we do it well, they'll do those additional units and more, right? And that's you might have sold them a little early to get them to do the second and third one all at once, but it ultimately will work very well if they do see the first one open and have success. Their mindset was right. 3 of these means you've got enough to do this really big, right? And tell me briefly, because I do want to try and schedule. I know the 16th is going to be tough for me to get out there for Discovery Day this month, but I would love to try. I'm gonna see if I can work it out with my wife, because we've got a couple of other things coming up shortly after that. But if I can get out there for the Discovery Day, I would love to do so. And then, honestly, Michael obviously connected us up for a reason, and he believes, and I think that there is a good opportunity. And I've been speaking about this through my network and all the people I've been working with over the last several weeks and months, trying to figure out what to do around here. And honestly, I sit in a very interesting position in life. I would love to hear more about your personal story. I have seen your content enough to kind of heard your story about, sports and baseball. And I love baseball. I'm a Mets fan. I know, unfortunately for you, but are you a Pirates fan?
All right, Abdi's a New York guy through and through, and I grew up in New England, so I'm sure that
so you're a Red Sox fan?
Yeah, New England across the board. I grew up in Portland.
Good. All right, I can respect that. If you were a Philly fan, I wouldn't know what to do with you.
No, you know what? My sister moved to Philadelphia because she went to UPenn.
Nice.
And I am so embarrassed at how quickly she became a Philly fan for Eagles, for Phillies. And I'm like, come on, like you can't just discard it. I've been in Maryland. I've been in Maryland for the past, 13 years, and I'm not an Orioles and Ravens fan, like
because they suck though.
Well, I lived in downtown Baltimore the year that the Ravens won the Super Bowl.
Did you really? Downtown Baltimore is not a greatest place to live, is it?
Well, so much like Chicago or any of these places, there's like the really bougie parts, and then there's like so I do business in Chicago, and everyone's like, oh, Chicago's so dangerous. And it's like, not anywhere you would ever go.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
the Bean, Michigan Ave, Wrigley Field is probably safer than some of these other places.
Yeah, I mean, I can go 15 minutes from my home and get in the middle of Newark. So yeah. But I still live here in a beautiful home.
Yeah. No, Newark's a great example. I'm assuming you've watched The Sopranos.
Well, I grew up on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that scene where he brings AJ to Newark and he's like, yeah, this is where the family
started. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. My roots are not far off in Bloomfield, New Jersey, which is, probably 2 towns over. And literally when the 60s happened and the whole, Newark riots and all the situation was going down with, race stuff, my grandparents moved from Bloomfield, which was right next to Newark, 3 towns over, and got to East Hanover and had lived there, the next 70 years. And so, my family's been in New Jersey, my parents' family. Now my parents just moved down to St. Petersburg, Florida, about a year ago. And so they're starting to spread us apart, but my entire family is very close. My brothers live both 5 minutes away from me down the road.
Do you get to go to St. Petersburg at all?
Yeah, we visited a couple times. It's not a bad trip.
My grandmother had a place in St. Petersburg, so that's where I grew up going. Awesome. And I was actually in St. Petersburg during Hurricane Andrew in 1994. And it was so bad that we had to get put in the Don Cesar, that big pink hotel.
I stayed there. I actually went down and stayed.
Yeah, that was the only place that didn't get flooded.
Because it's up on that hill.
Yeah.
So listen to this. So last year, it was my 10-year anniversary with my wife. I've got 3 kids. So we left the 3 kids home with grandma and my parents at my parents' house. So we flew down to Florida and we left. We spent the day. We left my kids at my parents' house and we went to the Don Cesar for a night. And because it was just our 10-year anniversary, I wanted to do something that was just us. And it gave us the opportunity to leave the kids with grandma and grandpa for a couple of days. And so it was like the coolest hotel. I felt like Sinatra.
Yeah, it's kind of stuck in that time.
Yeah, it was really nice, really nice.
Yeah,
but that's cool that you have roots to St. Petersburg, and that's where my family just threw a tree.
Yeah.
But
what else? What can I'm taking Michael's lead on this, Michael Abdi, that is, because for me, I think I could figure out how to shoestring this, but I don't think that's the best thing for the franchisees, which is the only reason I'm even, entertaining the thought of selling my marks to Abdi to have him, kind of run with this thing. So.
No, and I'll tell you, interestingly, in my experience and my family's experience, because we sold our company many times over and we kept running it and lessening our equity as we went. And when we officially sold to a PE firm, my father had 43% of the business collectively with different individuals in the family, all kind of combining together. And so he lost control of the majority ownership a long time ago, but no other individual took majority ownership. So he was still the largest shareholder or stakeholder in the longer list of investors that kept coming in. And at the end of the day, I think we had over 40 investors in our corporate entity before we franchised. And then when we franchised, we didn't force all those people to invest in the franchise. And so a lot of them did, but we basically had two companies. We had our invested companies that we bought over the 15 years up to that point, that we owned a piece of all of them in some way, shape, or form. And then we also then launched the franchise and brought in a whole new level of investors to raise the money to launch the system. Michael is that money in this case to give you the fuel to not just sell them. You obviously have enough of a product to sell in franchising, but that will go away quickly once they realize, or once they come to the mutiny position of there's no support. We can't find the sites. We can't get open quick enough. What you told us is not happening because you got too many sales and not enough resources to run the system.
Yeah.
And so there is a requirement for the founder to ultimately hand off some of this stuff. And what I would start to tell you is Michael does all pre-sales conversations. Yeah, you're great at it. You do your thing. You spoke this. Who's getting paid the commission on the sale though? Is Michael still making all this money, or do you get it?
Don't get me started.
I used to give the same conversation to my father all the time, and he would laugh at me. And I would tell him, Dad, you pay this salesman a lot of money and they get commission when they make a sale. Stop doing all the work for them, right? Like, let them talk, right? Like, you show up and shake hands at Discovery Day and you show your support in your way. You have to do it in your way. And I'm not saying don't do it exactly the way you've always done it, but you're going to evolve to the point where you no longer run oil change, like the oil change business. You now run a franchise. And that's the level I want to help you get to, so that you can ultimately become the CEO of a franchise. And I will admit to you right now, my objective is not to come in and steal your company in any way, shape, or form. I think that there's a great way to bring value and help you get to a point where this will be worth a lot more with the right systems and the right people. And I can tell you, they replaced me with a guy in my company, right? My family started this business from nothing. And I got to the point where I got replaced with a guy from Florida who used to run dental, basically a dental's network, right? For $200 million EBITDA, he was running this company for. And they hired that guy to replace me. I looked over at their, yeah, I can't work here anymore. Like, I can't do this at that level. And so there's a level out there that you can get this to on your own, and you will get it there, whether you did it good, bad, or indifferent. But can you get there and have the pride of walking away one day saying, and every person that bought from me, I gave it to them right? I have that. I walked away after all these years. And the one thing I can hang my hat on is there's not one franchisee that we took their money from and can call you up right now and say, oh, those people, they ripped me off. Oh, I didn't get the experience I was sold. And it was because we were genuinely there for them. And it becomes all about people and relationships. If it doesn't work between me, you, and Michael at a highest level of we get to know each other, we get comfortable, we get to know each other's families, and we ultimately really believe that we can work together to do this, you're going to make out, very handsomely to be able to say, my family, my business, my vision ultimately is succeeded here. And I'll likely take a huge opportunity from nothing to bring it to something, but I'm going to ultimately give it the same I've given everything I've ever done, and put that high level of, I wouldn't sell it to somebody if I didn't believe in it myself. I wouldn't do it if I didn't believe it was right. And hold the whole company up to a higher standard of, we treat these people as family now. If you're a franchisee of Costa Oil, you're a family member that I'm going to treat you like I would my brother. I'm not going to let him fail in his business. And that's the same level of trust and respect we all have to ultimately get to. Because I'll also tell you my true experience. We started bringing in, unfortunately, in the childcare industry, it's usually women. And we brought in some very high level, high power women who were, Pulitzer Prize written authors about parenting and childcare. And the CEO of our company now is a woman that ultimately didn't see eye to eye with, and she had a different way of doing it. I will tell you, up until that point, every person came in and knew it was our family. She never became a part of that. And that's how I started to see this divide of well, that was what we used to do when it was our or your family, right? Or that was the old way. And almost like it was a negative. No, your business is obviously very successful. And I said this to Brandon the other day. I will never tell you how to run your business. I'll never tell you I know more than you in oil change business, the industry. Like I told you, I couldn't even pop the hood of my own friggin' car right now. So you have no worries there that I'm going to try and come in and tell you how to do that part of it. Where I see my role will be to help guide you into where's the most value for your time. Talking to prospective franchisees, and Discovery Day is a big one, as any founder should be the face of that sale. And then where do you spend your time and effort to grow the brand so that you're not a chicken without a head running around putting out fires all the time? Because that's ultimately what franchisee becomes, because there's a cycle here. No matter how you want to do it, the franchisee cycle is going to happen to every one of your franchisees too. And they're super excited. They just bought, they were sold something amazing. Yeah, we're going to get, and then they get to the point where, what? I got to sign how much money in the bank loan, or how much, what? That's a lot. That's risk. They got to do all this decision making, right? And you convince them to do it. Yeah, we're excited again. We're going. And then the delays of construction, and then things happen, right? And so then they ultimately get through all that part, and then they got to open for business. And so I used to tell people, it's like, the least amount of love and support you can get in the role is you ultimately do your job well, and everyone just pats you on the back and you start over. You get the next franchisee just signed and you got to start it all over. And so I can tell you, you're already at the point where you need resources in the development side. Brandon was giving me some insight. I think he said you got like 55, 56 different, 57 individuals being managed by the two real estate guys in the field. It's a great structure. It probably provides a lot of support, which is necessary at the beginning stages of kind of figuring out where they're going to be and how they're going to get there. But it's going to require even more support so that Brandon can ultimately elevate up. I see a lot of value in his kind of bootstrap kind of mentality. And I think he could be a huge part, and not just, maybe more so operations. If I was to have my druthers right now and say I had limited number of resources to bring with, I might push him a little bit further into the operation side of this transition, where I would take on the real estate development construction stuff that I've always focused on in my role, and keep those field people reporting to me and or Brandon to me, and then use Brandon as the person they transition to. And so it would create a little bit of layering so that Brandon's not touching all 50 of those people throughout the whole.
Yeah, and he's not supposed to be.
I know how it works.
He can't help himself.
Yeah,
we have the double-edged sword of, like I talked about to David W., because we use a lot of third-party resources. There is a bunch of stuff that's out of our hands, and what that gives us is coverage with the franchisees. Like, if a third-party resource is the one who drops the ball, as long as we do everything in our power, and I tell our guys back there day in, day out, like, you can only control the variables that you control. As long as you're doing your best to make these franchisees feel like they're supported, that's all you can do. And then at a certain point, it is out of our hands. But that only goes so far before it becomes, okay, now we have to replace a vendor because they're just not getting it done. Because ultimately we vouched for them. Ultimately,
it has to be reciprocated, right?
So, we have mastered, and one thing I train everyone on this office, because it's something that I've mastered inside the stores as well, is the perception of progress. And I hammer it into these guys. There are little cues that you can give the franchisees, because you're right. There's these ebbs and flows. There's honeymoon phase. Then there's the doldrums of actually having to run the thing. And then, when you start seeing the numbers go up, and then you're back high again, and then employee leaves, and then you're back down again. And there's all of that. And so
they start asking you, what did you do for me? What do you mean you now make $150,000 a year and you don't think I did anything?
Yeah, no, it's, that part is mentally tough, but, I think that especially we've done a really good job of being cognizant of everything's recorded these days. Everything, like, no matter how frustrated you get with a franchisee, you have to always take the high road. You have to always mitigate any kind of situation.
Always.
You know, one of our franchisee, his basement's flooding, and his lease that he signed, even though he used his own attorney to review the lease and we have no part of that process, he's like, the landlord's not fixing this. And we have to take the position of like, you know, what
There's
are,
not much
you
we
know,
can do. Yeah.
there's not much we can do. And so we're always dancing that fine line,
Yep.
but I think we've done a really good job. And
Do you provide like a reference list of, you know, supporting cast members, vendors, like attorneys, like, you know, different people they're going to need to interface with?
yeah, we have a pretty elaborate Gantt chart. So we have the steps from your welcome call to getting open laid out. Very
What system are you using to manage it?
Google Sheets.
Okay, so it's manually, someone's got to make sure they go into each one of those.
Yeah, we also, we're heavy in Slack. Like every franchisee is in Slack. We have channels for every project you can think of. We have pre-construction channels, and then we have post-opening channels, and then we have, you know, I can invite you into our Slack and you can actually get a view into how things operate. But like just this morning, we have a channel called Open and Operating, and you only get invited to that channel once your store is open. And so those guys, you know, it's very collaborative, and everybody seems to like that. But also everyone who's in the process of finding a site, once they sign a lease, they get a new channel with a project number, and then they go all the way through the process, and then their channel gets renamed to their address. And then once their channel is open, if there's not something that they want, you know, everyone to be able to see, they can ask anything they want within that channel. And then some of our multi-unit guys will have both simultaneously. They might have a channel for their store that's open, but then also a second channel that's specifically for, you know, the construction process or the leasing process.
So how do you make sure that everybody gets the same? So I guess you can broadcast to all those channels with one message consistently, and you can then independently find each one of, you can message each of them independently. But is it someone's job right now to make sure that every one of those franchisees goes through the steps? How do you make sure that, you know, is there any way it's automated in any way?
Yeah, so the sheets are updated manually by either Cody or Aaron, who are two associates.
Yep.
Every single person in our office staff is in basically every channel on Slack. So someone will always get to a question. But as far as like these guys back here that have their bi-weekly calls, because I had to move the calls from weekly to bi-weekly, because the weekly calls, there's just too much downtime and there are too many calls where nothing was actually getting done. So it was actually a disservice to the franchisees. I thought in the beginning, like, okay, if we call them every week, they'll appreciate that. In fact, it actually probably made things worse, because if you go 3 straight weeks with no progress, a weekly call just reminds them that nothing has happened.
Yep.
So bi-weekly, at least it's a easier workload on those guys, but also is more productive for the franchisees. So they are responsible for, you know, every franchisee has their own file, which is separate from their Gantt chart, which has like the phone call and the notes that were taken as well. But I mean, we're really pushing.
Are you using a CRM system in any way?
No,
or is that Slack?
Just Sheets.
All of your
Just Sheets.
communication is being captured in Slack and Sheets.
Yeah, we're trying to push everything to Slack, everything possible, especially since you can integrate all of the Google products onto Slack. So like you can embed files and pin them. So we can pin every individual's file inside their Slack channel. And so, you know, we even have I just had one of my employees create a sheet that labels each franchisee based on their participation in Slack. And so there's active, on, but not active, and not joined yet. And so our goal is to get everyone to move from not joined to joined, but not active, and then joined, but not active to active.
Awesome. Excellent. So in the, give me a quick understanding of, and I don't want to hold you all day because I could talk to you for days, I'm sure.
nothing's more important right now than figuring out these snows. So
Yeah, exactly. So give me a breakdown of what does a good LOI look like for a franchisee, right? If I was your franchisee and I was to say, hey, I found the site, it's got all the hits all the markers on the criteria, but the landlord wants X. At what point are you saying, shit, that don't work, right? Where are the numbers in terms of the
yeah, so we've tried not to change the bands on this because I've built this business in secondary markets. We're talking about Western Pennsylvania, Cleveland. These are secondary markets. So when we get someone in Mesa, Arizona or Austin, it's really difficult to not give them more leeway because of their market. But
Yep.
you know, our master broker is a company called Morrow Hill, and they're pretty well known in the franchise space, and they know what our parameters are. And we have given some latitude in terms of the ground lease to as much as $4,000 a month. But that's really the high end. Like when we first started this, we were saying we wanted our ground leases to be between $1,000 and $1,500 a month. And that very quickly went to $2,000 a month. And now, you know, we have some ground leases that are $3,000 a month, and it's gotten away from that original.
How many years is a ground lease on one of these properties?
It's got to be 15.
At least 15.
Yeah, because our building is currently, and I know Abdi is thinking about, you know, maybe making some changes here, but we have a leaseback program, and we have a group of private investors that fund the construction of the building. And so if they're putting a building on ground that they don't own, they need to be protected by a 15-year ground lease.
And I would definitely like to understand all of that very, very well. I've gotten very savvy over the years of negotiating and managing, leases in long terms. We were in the 15, 20-year terms with 3 5-year extensions, but we were not touching ground leases. And I know it's just a different way to do it. But is there any extension on the 15 years, or is that a buyback you mentioned from the construction investor? So give me a little bit of history there. When a franchisee finds a property and now something needs to be built for, let's say, $300,000, how do they go about doing that? Is that on them? Or are they connecting up with somebody?
So it ultimately is up to them, but the majority of our people have opted to use our leaseback program. And so they'll do a welcome call with the gentleman, Peter Colvin, who is the head of Easy Leasebacks. They will then get on a call with the architect, which is a guy named Brian Winkleman, and they'll start going through the process. And it usually involves, you know, having to pay some money for a preliminary site drawing, a test fit, doing that process. And then, you know, we try to not have our franchisees spend any money until we know that the use is going to be approved, because we don't want them to go through the whole process only to find out that an oil change building won't be approved on that site.
Yep.
And so that's largely handled by Peter Colvin and Brian Winkleman. We are currently in talks with a company called Siteology that is an in-house kind of project manager of that type of thing. Because again, in lieu of having internal people being able to participate in these conditional use hearings and call local zoning boards and things like that, we have to outsource it because we just don't have the resources to do it in-house.
No, and I know that I was getting to the point in my system where I was doing it up till probably until COVID happened, right? And so up through franchisee probably like 55, I was at every one of those approval meetings, and I would show up if they got, postponed for a month. I'd have to come back.
Yeah.
And it became a dog as we were going out to Raleigh and Charlotte and Tennessee and, all these other places to go do this. And so when I instituted a construction manager or a head of construction into the team, he took that role on with the architect. And so I basically brought a person in that was able to take on a very important role, which was making sure we kept control of this franchisee and developers thing, because we were always the third party, outcome of it's not our lease, it's not our property, but we want to make sure it gets open as quick as possible because our royalties depend on it. And so I get it. I think that that's more than enough info I needed for the day. Actually, one last question. So if they've got a $4,000 a month ground lease Do they pay additional rent on that, or is that all they pay?
No, so the building itself, the current structure of the leaseback program is basically a 10 cap. So whatever the final project cost comes to be. So let's just use our first construction, for
I
example.
get,
'cause
I understand it well. So I don't need the example of the 10 cap structure. I get it. So that's great. That's that. So how does the leaseback program work? Are they giving you any value other than to just say, we're giving this service? If a franchisee wants to use us, we'll do this at this price?
Yeah, we get a development fee. I have waived it for some of these initial people because they've just been in the pipeline way too long, and I don't want to add on to their payment because the number for the building has changed since day one.
Of course. Yep. The price is going up significantly every time you build it, right?
Yeah, well, it should actually begin to go down now that we have scale, but
Yeah, you should. You won't see it that way. No matter what, we'll look at it. And what I'll tell you is there's something that is cyclical in franchising as well. And it's always looking at what you do and is it the most efficient way to keep doing it. And so once you create a prototype or an architect of record that you require everyone to use, or some kind of structure that says you can only do X and you have to follow this to get me to approve you to do X, then once you have it, then you'll ultimately say, this is it, right? And let's try not to deviate as much as possible and let's set it up. The less you have to feel those pings of, it took them too long, I don't want them to suffer any more than I thought. You've got to try and emotionally detach yourself from all that crap and say, we're giving enough value and enough opportunity for you to do it this way, which is why you're paying the extra dollar to us, right? Or whoever. And so there might be a way to skin it differently to make you feel more kind of comfortable with the trade and call it something else, or move the monies away in a different, move the money around in a different way. And I know Abdi will probably have 10 ways till Sunday and how to finance and do all that other stuff. And so I think those solutions can almost be tabled from our brain power of what do we do to support franchisees in that time before they can get to finding the real estate. And once we do, what are the absolutes they need to have in order to be open on day one saying, I'm prepared. Day one, they're not calling up and saying, we got more cars than we can handle. What do we do? Everyone's jumping in to try and solve. We want to pre-anticipate that we're going to do this really well. We're going to market it really well. You're going to have a lot of cars. You better be prepared and make sure they are. So I think there's opportunity here in terms of you're doing something phenomenally well, obviously, to get all these franchisees to buy. Your systems and operations are sufficient. I haven't dug deep enough to really know if there's ways to make them more efficient or to come up with better ways to push on them, but keep it simple, right? At this point, don't change any of that stuff. How do you just button it up so that, like you said, you can become the master? And this is what franchising is. The perception of progress and value and time and money and effort that you provide your new customer, not the person that's getting an oil change. Your new customer is the franchisee that can provide the people to get the oil changes. And so that's where, you'll have to kind of get this mentality away from running the shops and getting to running this bigger system here. But hopefully I can help you do it. Right. And I think that there are a lot of outsource ways to do it, but I ran a team of 3 people. My at the largest point in my career under Lightbridge, I had a 3-person team: 1 real estate manager, 1 construction manager, and 1 coordinator director, role. And we were able to support, anywhere between 20 people looking for real estate, 20 people that have signed or waiting for approvals and for construction to begin or open. And then, all the people that we kept cycling through as they opened. We would start with another new person every couple of weeks, right? We would always have new sales happening. So I see a lot of opportunity for me to fit in and play a big role in helping you figure it all out in a sense. And that's what I think excites me the most. It needs to be figured out a little, right? It's there. There's tons of value. You know your stuff, but it can be figured out at a point in which you can really blow this thing up to 10, 15, 20 times, not percent, times, right? And that's where I think Michael's licking his lips a little bit and saying, with a little bit of, good people in between the gaps here, we could really turn this into 10 times the size, right? And that could really drive the value, because like you said, once you have the systems in place and it's working, it just multiplies its own value, because you've got all this data now, you've got all this information, and replicating it becomes a lot easier. So I'm open to any questions, thoughts you might have for me. And let's try and wrap here in the next 5 minutes, if not sooner. But what are you thinking? Where do you stand in terms of how you see the world?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm taking the cues from Abdi, since, you know, he's doing the thing that we want to do. And so I've always, whether it was Jeff Duden or anyone, I've always lived by, you know, surround yourself with people who have done what you're trying to do. And so we are doing the absolute maximum right now with the absolute least. And so that is good enough for a very short period of time, but it's not good enough indefinitely. And so, you know, if I'm taking you know, from a value standpoint, you know, I'm taking a huge hit by selling what I'm selling for what I'm selling it for. But I also know that the payoff potential could be massive. And
I'll give you a little bit of personal here. If Michael's kicking out just enough to get me intrigued. And I said to him, I said, look, you know, I'm very fortunate to be able to leave my former job after 25 years of working there with a severance. And I'm very fortunate to be able to say, I've got some time to figure it out. But at the same time, I'm not doing this just because I want a job, right? I don't really want a job. I want to be able to take something that has immense value and help you and your family get to a place where you can hang your hat at the end of the day and say, if we didn't do it that way, I never would have gotten to that level. I could have gotten to successful. You're already successful, right? I mean, you could get to a point, but there's a level in which, and I think I learned this very, easily in my growing up from my father, because I watched him give away equity over and over again, only to be able to then sell his entirety of his company. What I will tell you is your trademarks, your intellectual property and your systems, the ecosystem, your flow charts, that's yours. That's your money. That's your value. You can use those things, and we should add to those things as you get further and further along in branding. You'll even add more value to the overall sale of the company in the future, because those exist. And so there's so many ways in which hopefully I can help educate you and Michael even on what I learned going through this, transition of mom and pop shop to franchise player to bought by a PE firm franchise player, and then exiting, right? And watching that transition exit with everyone's head up rather than, ruining the whole system over it. And so ultimately the exit is a bigger solution than, everyone might want from your perspective, but I'm really not here for, any purpose other than to help you get to a point where you can look back and say, I'm proud of this. That's literally my name on that. And I'm proud that I did this the right way for the people that bought it from me, for the owners of the shops, the franchisees, and the consumers of it. I've never got away from doing it right. And as long as you do it that way, hey, if you only get to 70 open in the next 2 to 3 years, the multiple is still going to be pretty significant. And so, obviously you've got to get the next few years and get all those opens, but that's where we've got to find solutions to figure out what's the best way to do it. And I know if you're bringing in guys like Michael to come up with solutions, he's gonna figure them out, right? It's just a matter of how do we get our hands around all of it to do it right while that's all happening. So
it's just a question of how many Newark guys do I want to surround myself with?
Hey, at least I'm not a Yankee fan.
Yeah, fair enough. Although it's hard not to like Aaron Judge. He's just such a good guy.
I wish he would have left though. He is a good guy. And I feel the same way about Pete Alonso too. But, that'll be another thing. We just lost DeGrom and I'm devastated over it still.
Yeah.
He was the best.
I played against Matt Harvey in college.
Did you really? What year did you graduate?
2010.
Okay. So you're younger than me by a couple of years. My buddy, my brother-in-law now, but my buddy since I was 6 years old growing up, married my sister, my sister-in-law. Me and my best friend growing up married sisters. He was all Big East for Rutgers 1 year, and ultimately went on and played independent ball out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and was playing with a couple of other teams in New Jersey, the Trenton Thunder, I think he played with for a season. Ultimately, slid into third base head first and broke his thumb, and that was that. But yeah, he got in at a high level. I went with him 1 year out to Arizona for a Brewers tryout, and it was fucking awesome. It was so cool to just get to watch him playing out there with all these guys. And out of like 200 guys that had showed up to the field, they picked one, Spanish kid that threw 100 miles an hour. And it was like, why'd they even invite you if they weren't even looking for a center fielder? Like,
Yeah, it's a lot of politics in that sport.
All sports, right? And anything at that
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. Baseball seems to, high school basketball, I think, is the most politics. But as far as professional sports go, I think baseball might take the cake, because it's just like some of these guys, the best players in the world are not necessarily in the MLB. Oftentimes it's tied to what was their bonus, how many chances are they going to get. I played against Wagner. They were in our conference, so a lot of Staten Island guys.
Yeah.
And I became really good friends with this kid that signed with the Mets as an undrafted free agent, and literally didn't give up a run, gave up like 3 hits, had a ton of strikeouts, and still got released because they had to make room for someone that had a $1 million signing bonus, and they needed the roster space.
Roster spot, yeah.
And like, it doesn't matter how good he did. He literally did the best you could possibly do, but he got released. And it's such a grind. And I played against Kalamazoo, and I was in that league because that's the Frontier League.
Yeah, the Frontier League he was in, yeah.
And there was one period in time where I was playing for the Pensacola Pelicans. I got released. I had to drive from Pensacola to Macon, Georgia. From Macon, Georgia, I drove to Novi, Michigan, which is outside of Detroit, to meet with the Windy City Thunderbolts, only to sit on the bullpen, not play a single inning, and then get released because they have to cut the rosters down for playoffs. And like, just like an awful week. And I'm like, what am I doing?
You also went over to Greece to play for a while?
Yeah. And I played overseas was fun. And actually some of those overseas leagues pay a lot better than minor league baseball. So like the Dutch league, which is, they have a couple different levels, and one of them is the Hoofda class. And that's where like Andrew Jones, Sidney Ponson, they'll go and play in that league. Like you can get like $50,000 a year in salary to play in some of those larger leagues. Awesome. And then the Italian league is a really good one too.
Is it really? I didn't know the Italians even played baseball.
Yeah, no, Mike Piazza so it's funny because Mike Piazza just posted about Matt Harvey. Apparently Matt Harvey is Italian, and he's going to play on the Italian team for the World Baseball Classic.
Oh, get the fuck out of here. We don't want that schmuck.
So Mike Piazza,
I can call him that.
Mike Piazza is the head coach for the Italian team.
Oh, I love Mike Piazza. That was literally my boyhood idol right there, Mike Piazza.
Yeah, they got rid of he was the ultimate Mr. Insignificant because he was drafted in like the 52nd round.
Well, Lasorda's his uncle, right?
Something like that, yeah. But so the MLB got rid of that, and they only have 30 rounds now. So there's never going to be another
undrafted free agent back nowadays, right?
Yeah, there's not going to be another Mike Piazza ever again.
Well, that's true anyway, because he's a Hall of Famer. And
that's true. It's true on its own, but
maybe the greatest hitting catcher of all time.
Yeah.
Hey, Costa, it was really great to finally get to meet you after Michael's told me so much about you. I really do have a lot of excitement for the potential opportunity here. I'll keep talking to Michael. I'm going to try and convince my wife to let me come out there the 15th, 16th. Like you, I've got a couple of little kids here. I've got a 10-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 5-year-old. So not so easy for me to just spring it on her that I'm going away for 2 days in 2 weeks. But I'm going to try and make it out there. If not, I'll see if I can make it out for the next Discovery Day. Maybe
we do hold it virtually.
Oh, cool. All right, so definitely I'll do it virtually if I can't get out there for whatever reason. but I'm
Yeah.
going to try and convince her to let me shoot out for the 15th, go out to dinner with everybody, and then kind of sit in as we'll call it a potential franchisee at the meetings, but we'll see how it plays. So I'll keep talking, and let me know if you have any questions, thoughts, just want to kick anything around. More than happy to connect up. So,
All right. Sounds good.
all right, my man. Talk soon.
Yep.
Have a
Bye.
good one.